Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Parenting is Easy, Said No One Ever. I am your host, Chananya Abraham, and I have the pleasure to share with you an amazing conversation with an entrepreneurial mom of twins, Julie, who has had such a healthy balance regarding how to deal with things at home, at work, within a marriage, with other people. I think communication is probably one of the main things that we talked about over here, having a sense of grace and the importance of being able to appreciate what we're going through with our kids, I think is another really important part of this. The focus in general of this conversation was about the entrepreneurship and how to have a healthy balance. But there were so many awesome topics that we talked about when it comes to being able to be a parent, being able to be a business owner, having a healthy balance, but also having me time, having a low time, whether it's with mom alone or whether it's with a spouse. There are so many awesome topics, and I'm so happy to be able to give this awesome interview to you. As always, if you like listening to this interview, please like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. We love to hear any comments. You can please leave us anywhere you listen to the podcast, on YouTube, or you can also email us at parentingiseasypodcast@gmail.com. And if you have any questions, concerns, or maybe ideas for future guests, please feel free to reach out to us at that email. Again, that would be parentingiseasypodcast@gmail.com, or you can find us on social media. Links for us and for Julie will be posted in the description show notes. Enjoy the episode. So, Julie, jumping right into it over here, and there's so many different areas, especially when it comes to like entrepreneurship, that I would love to get to, and I think I have a personal questioning to as well. But I'm curious when it comes to specifically regarding parenting and being able to run a company and maybe even start a company and having to have that balancing act, as we like to call it. I'm curious, what's the first thing that comes to mind regarding the biggest lesson learned from being able to be an entrepreneur and also being a mom?
Yeah. It's a good one. I will tell you, I did start my business 6 years before I had twin girls. So I did have a little bit of a runway to only have to focus on the business before having children. But I will say that the process of having a business and then having children, it's difficult. And the work-life balance wasn't as easy as what I had told myself it would be. So I will say the biggest thing I learned is to give myself grace and to give myself the permission to not be perfect at everything that I was trying to do. And once I realized that it was never going to be perfect, things started to click in place.
Very well said. I remember there was a teacher of one of my kids that said, well, the line is, practice makes perfect. It's practice makes progress. And I think that changed a lot, at least in our household, of how we look at things, making sure that, okay, let's work with it. And it's not something that has to be perfect. And perfect doesn't have to be perfect. And I think when it comes to parenting, I think it's one of the biggest lessons that we can learn. And that starts with, I think, like you said, so beautifully, is it starts with giving grace to self. So how do you go about doing that?
Well, it's a balancing act. I will say once I had children, I restructured my workday. I used to be available 24/7 to my clients. I would take phone calls at 8:00 at night if I had to. And when I had children, I realized that I had to set boundaries for myself so that while I was at work, I was at work. And then when I stopped working at 5:00 and came home, I wasn't on my cell phone. I wasn't thinking about work. I was trying to apply all of my energy to my children because, as I'm sure you know, like you have such a small window of time once they're in school to actually spend time with them. So I do still keep those boundaries just to make sure that, and again, once they go to sleep, if I need to do more work, I can. But it is important that they see that I am working, right? That I am running a business. But it's also great when they say, hey, mommy, can we go see a movie tonight? And I say, yep, let's go, and it really does help.
You're able to go ahead and switch to that.
Exactly.
That's awesome. So nowadays we have this thing in our pockets that really can distract us a lot, especially when it comes to customer service, customer care, and really making sure that our business is staying on par or competitive or in a place where we're going to try to get as many Google positive reviews as possible. And we also want to make sure that our kids want to ask us questions, have dinner with us, do homework with us, and us being able to be the taxi services that we are so many times. So I'm curious, how do you make sure that, that device in our pockets doesn't distract us?
So I'd have to say, I think it's largely because I'm a Gen Xer, right? So I didn't grow up with it in my pocket. I didn't have my first cell phone until I was 22 years old. I'm 45 now. So I will say that because it wasn't a device that I was on all the time, even in my 20s and 30s, I do feel like I see it as what it is. It's a tool, right? And during the day, believe it or not, even during the day, I'm not texting. I don't text clients. I don't give them my cell phone so that they can text me. They have my phone number. They can call me at the office. They can call me on my mobile, but I really am not a super user. I think honestly, some of it's just generational, right? We just didn't, that wasn't where we spent a majority of our time. And so for me, putting the phone down and walking into another room doesn't cause me anxiety. I'm able to do it free and clear. So not everybody can do that, but I don't seem to have a problem doing that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess, my next line of question would be, but I think you've sort of already answered it, would be, when we're looking to be fully present with our children and making sure that we're meeting the rigorous demands when it comes to the businesses that we're running, how can we make sure that we're having that balancing act properly? And I think, like you're saying, making sure that we're not attached or depends on it, and we're able to really allocate the proper time for the proper things. And as important as the business is, knowing what our priorities are, and from the hours of 2, 3, 4 p.m. until 8, 9 p.m. where they're going to bed, this is my number one priority. So yes, I have a business, but I'm a mom, and this is what I need to take care of right now. I'm a dad. This is what I need to be doing. And that email may be important, or I have to take care of that issue, or find a solution to the nagging problem that we've all been driving us crazy for the past week. And right now, this is what I need to do. And I think that's such a important point when it comes to parenting aspect of that leading by example. And I'm curious, when we talk about allocating proper time, giving grace, and having a proper balance, how is that message able, besides for just the modeling, it sounds like you've been able to do, Julie, but how can we model that for our kids in a way where they can see that there's a time and a place for everything, and we have to be able to give compliments to ourselves in a certain way as well?
Absolutely. The one thing I would say is talk to your kids. Tell your kids, explain to your kids what you do, why you're doing it, and why it's important. And from a very young age, as kids are growing, they want their mommy, they want their daddy, they want them around all the time. And there are times when you do have to go to work and they're not happy and they don't understand. And so I just started sharing it with my girls at a very young age, getting them to understand, look, mommy goes to work, but hey, mommy's going to come home and here are the things we're going to do together. And I will say that now they're soon to be 10 years old in December. And
Oh, wow.
They actually motivate me, and they say, we know you have to work, but we can't wait to see you after. And there's nothing greater than when they come home from school and I say, hey girls, how was your day? How did things go? And they look at me and say, Mommy, how was your day? What happened? Tell us. And so the more you can talk to your children and bring them into your world, they may not understand what you do. They may not understand who your clients are, but explain to them why you're working and why it's important. And I honestly think that it helps them have a better understanding of, oh, it's not just that we choose to not spend more time. It's that, hey, this is the cause, this is the effect, and here's how this is going to benefit you, right, as you get older.
That makes perfect sense. And it sounds, I think, something that, at least from hearing it from you, that you've obviously worked on, and it's not something that happens overnight. And I'm curious, can you talk a little bit about, let's say, whether it's some situations that, not that you want to change them, because I think all of our situations help us lead to where we are today. And it's not like I may have regrets so that I could do something different for the future, but certain, let's call them mistakes / life lessons when it comes to parenting and having that balancing act. Anything that comes to mind for you that you can say, well, I remember how that went down and maybe I could have done that a little bit different, and something that you've learned from in that balancing act?
Yeah, I have learned. I mean, I think as parents, we carry a lot of guilt, for the decisions that we make. And I think early on in those early years, I carried an immense weight of guilt, and that I felt I wasn't doing enough, and I couldn't understand why I didn't want to be a stay-at-home mom, right? And for some people, that's all they've ever dreamed of. And for me, that wasn't necessarily when I was being pulled, right? I still saw them. I still, came home for lunch and saw them every day and made time. But I think in the early years too, I think I was so worried about the business because, being a CEO and then having children, I mean, I really had to say to myself, for a year and a half, 2 years, that I was just going to like be mediocre, right? I was going to just survive with the clients I had. I wasn't going to grow. I had to just let it be where it was so that I could learn how to become a mom. And I think I put too much pressure on myself in those early days to get the business back up and running faster. And so there is a little bit of looking back and going, I really do wish I would have soaked up a little bit more time when they were younger, because, they're almost 10, and I know in a few years they'll be with their friends and things like that. The other mistakes that I've made too is, I think, just putting too much pressure on everything to be perfect. And I spent a lot of time worrying about that when I really should have just been enjoying taking them to the zoo or taking them to the park, without necessarily thinking about all of the other things. So that's something that now that they are older, I will say I do feel the pull to spend more time with them now. And I'm more giving of my time now. When they have school breaks, I'm taking days off. I'm traveling with them with my husband and taking them wherever we go. Every weekend I spend time with them. We call them the S days. And it's really, weekends are all about them. I can go to dinner parties and cocktail parties when they're, in college. And, but if we go somewhere, they come with us. And so I think I've just learned, that the time is very fleeting, especially with children, and to appreciate it every day, even if I'm stressed out.
Yes, I think that's a very good point. Is A, to appreciate it, and I want to go back to something you were just saying before, which I think is so important. Is that there will always be another cocktail party, but there will never be another time where my daughters will be 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, and I think that's really, really important point. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think sometimes as parents we have a FOMO type attachment to our social lives, which is important to have.
Yes.
And it's in some ways could be part of the fuel that keeps us going, and having adult friends, because sometimes hey, I can talk a different way to an adult, or we're not having them correcting them and saying it's I, not me, or please, and stuff like that. We're not doing that with our adults, but sometimes it just comes out naturally because we're so used to doing that. And at the same time, to also realize right now, my child, they're 6 years old, and I'm never going to get this opportunity again.
Yeah.
So being able to be there with them, and instead of having the cocktail party or going to the Super Bowl party, let me watch at home with my kids, because that's something that we're never gonna get again. And the memory created is something that's always going to be there for that, and which I think is such a beautiful way of doing it. At the same time, I think when it comes to mom and dad, it's very important for them to recharge and to have time for themselves. Yes. So how, on top of having a business and running things the way you do, I'm curious, how can you, or what would you recommend to people that are sort of struggling with that, daddy and me time, or husband and wife time that is so important for personally, but also for the kids and for the family dynamics?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I will say it's a work in progress, right? In those early years, you don't have much time for anything. You know that, right? Those are the hard years. I will say, my husband is also a business owner, so he also has a demanding schedule, but we do carve out time to do things together. Once in a while, we will take a trip with some friends, on a weekend, and we will go and we will enjoy it. And we still talk about the kids most of the time that we're there, but we do still carve out that time. And it is important because, as parents, our greatest gifts are our children. That's what we talk about, and they're going to be our focus, right, for the next however many years. But it is important to connect and talk and make sure that we communicate. So I know with my husband and I, when I come home from work, I typically will go into his office and we'll sit and chat for just 10, 15 minutes without the kids, just so that we have a touch point or a connection throughout the day to just be like, hey, how was your day? How was your day? And just kind of and chat. And then I will say my husband's also really incredible too, that if we, want to do something with the children or we want to go somewhere, I mean, he clears his schedule and we go. So I think it's been a work in progress, but we're doing much better now than probably the first couple years, right? It's always a push-pull, but it's important to the balance, and our children see that. So they actually don't mind when he and I go out to dinner or if we travel for a weekend, because they know that that's our time, to be together.
Right. And I think when they know also is that it's as important for mommy and daddy to have this time because it also helps
Correct.
us and helps us as the way they're going to work with us. I think that's a very, very good point. At the same time, you can deal a lot of times with children like, no, well, I want to spend time with you or I want to do certain things.
Yes.
So I'm curious, how to create a atmosphere at home where it's not that there's an a healthy balance, which there can be, but sometimes from the child's point of view, they'll be like, "Hey, this is not fair." How do you talk to them, or how do you communicate in a way where they're understanding that not only am I not with my parents right now, but really what's happening right now is good for us, even though
Yep.
we're not together.
Yep. It goes back to what I said earlier in communicating and communicate with them early. And,
Yes,
from our perspective, I love children because children are so honest. They'll tell you exactly how they feel. They're
non-filtered.
unfiltered. And so a lot of times, when we're dealing with one of the twins that's particularly upset because we're going out to dinner and crying and throwing a fit, what I say is, how you feel whenever, mommy comes home and you want to spend time with me. Well, that's how I feel about daddy. And so I
Mm.
want to go. And so if you relate it to how they feel and how they perceive their time with us, it's not easy. I'll tell you, there have been many dinners that my husband and I have gone to, and I've been crying because one of them is crying and it upsets me. but but I will say just communicating with them and helping them develop that communication, because I will say that as a result, there will be times where one of my daughters will say, "Mommy, I just want you right now." Okay, great. Let's go spend time together. So they now also understand that it's okay for them to ask for my time when they really need it. And so again, it's been a work in progress for the last 9 years, but the more that you can communicate openly with your kids, I know growing up that wasn't necessarily how you did it in the 80s or the 90s. Communication is just so critical to them understanding all of these balance things that you have to balance.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things I'm taking out what you're saying is that I think it's very important and vital for kids to also realize I have feelings
Yes.
too, and what I'm going through is something that I need, and there's nothing wrong with that because just because I'm an adult doesn't make me any less needy or wanting certain things as you,
Exactly.
and I think it's very okay for a child to know
Yes.
that. Now, what makes it, I think in your situation, I would say that, which is I'm very curious to hear about, is that you have two people that have been competing for mommy and daddy's time for the past 9 years, 365 days a
Yeah.
year. And I'm curious, what is that balance of making sure that, yes, there's a family unit,
Yes.
but yet also there's the individual and they get to sort of feel and be and have their emotional cups filled for what they need, which could be very, very
They are
different. And how to make sure that while that competition is there, and the competition might even be a good thing in some
different.
ways, but yet they're each fed what it is that they need to be fed.
Mhm. No, it's a great question. I found having twins too is interesting because they are the same age and they're going through everything at the same time. But I've found that they each go through different phases 6 months apart. So one will be going through one phase while the other one isn't. And so what it allows is that it allows me to balance the energy, in which if I know that one is feeling particularly emotional or having a hard time. It's interesting. They're amazing kids, but it's almost like they allow the other one to have their moment, and then when they're ready to have their moment, they can. And it's very fair in our household, right? Like if we do stuff with our children, we make sure that we're spending equal time. But the girls are very good at communicating when they do want some one-on-one time. But with twins, I will say it is hard, right? Because they are a package deal. They love being together, right? There's very few, like, they are each other's best
And
friends.
hopefully it stays that way.
Yeah, I hope so too. I think as we get into the teenage years, it might shift a little bit, um, but they really love being together. And when they're not together, they're not happy. So what we try to do is we try to give each one an opportunity to pick the thing, right? So what do you want to do today? And then we do what that person wants to do, and we take turns. And then when there are opportunities to do something with each of them separately, we just try to balance it so that they understand that it's the equivalent, right? We're not spending more time with one than the other. They're not getting better things, if they're with mommy or daddy. But it is hard, and I think I still struggle with them being twins and feeling like it is hard to separate them. I mean, like you can separate them. They're separated in school, right? They're not in the same class. They have, some of the same friends. They have different friends as well. But I do think the dynamic is challenging, and I do think it continues to be the one thing I hope I'm doing right.
I think just having that question in our heads as parents is, am I doing the right
Yeah.
thing? And maybe even like you're saying before, maybe with like a touch of guilt regarding, am I doing the right
Yes.
thing? I think is a very important question as a parent to constantly have, because the answer is different. The answer is different when they were 6, when they were 8, and now when they're 9, and when they're going to be 15, 16, 17, the answer is going to be very different as well. And I think just that question alone is a very important and I think very healthy question to have regarding what's happening. I'm curious, based on the way you're talking of giving each one what they need, have there been situations where you've actually been able to say in their own way that they can understand that, well, I'm struggling with this too, or I'm not able to do certain things the way you want because of what I'm going through, and I'm having a hard time too. How do you go about talking about that? Or maybe you could share a story of something that happened specifically where you were able to say that.
So, in our household, it's, we don't yell a lot in our household, right? The kids have always been good kids. They never get in trouble. But there are times where when I'm feeling overwhelmed or I'm feeling stressed, and as you know, with kids, when they want something, they want it right away or they want it quickly. And I remember this.
They want it faster than Amazon
Right,
Prime.
exactly, right? Like, mommy, why can't you call Amazon? You don't know anyone at Amazon? I'm like, I don't. But no, I mean, even just a couple of weeks ago, I was having I was just overwhelmed, right? With the book, the business, all of the things that were being required of me. And I was feeling very vulnerable, right? And I'd come home and they were so excited to see me. And I should have taken 10 minutes to myself to just reset. And I sort of talked more directly at my daughter when she asked me to get her blueberries. And she kept asking, Mommy, I want blueberries. And I was like, you're 9. You can get them yourself. But it was a tone that they don't hear often. And I caught myself and I said, you know what? I should not have replied to you that way. I said, I'm so, because it upset her, right? Because she doesn't hear that tone. And I apologized and I explained that I was feeling overwhelmed, that it was no excuse, right? I shouldn't have spoken that way. I was sorry. And she's like, you know what, Mommy, that's okay. I can get my blueberries. And she got up and got them herself. And she did, she knew that I didn't mean it. But again, I'm imperfect. But when those situations come up, I do feel like if I at least say to them, look, I'm having a tough moment, or if we've had,
I need a minute.
I just need a few minutes of time, only 10. I don't need more than that, just 10 minutes. And then I'll come back down. They're really good now about giving me that space because they know that I'll be able to come down and be excited and turn into, mommy mode.
Yeah, I think that's such a healthy way of looking at it. And I think the message or the seeds that we plant for having kids see that we're fallible and we're also going to make mistakes and we also have needs.
Yeah.
I think it's such a vital lesson for kids to realize that adults are kids too, in a certain
Yes.
way, and we are the same. And I'm gonna mess up because I'm a human being, and it's gonna happen.
Yes.
And I'm sorry that happened, and I'm here, and let's go get more blueberries
Exactly.
and let's figure that out. And I think that's such an important lesson. And you started bringing up the book, and it was something that I want to talk a little bit about what this book is about, and a little bit more about the process that has transpired over the past couple of months on this.
Absolutely. Dare to Become from the Corner Booth to the Corner Office is really a prescriptive bio about my journey from working in my parents' restaurant when I was a teenager and how the lessons that they so richly taught me about work ethic and communication, responsibility, accountability, how I took those experiences from the time I was 16 until I was 22, how I took them and applied them in the corporate world, and then how I allowed them to become the foundation for starting my business. And in the book, I talk about a lot of different scenarios. I do cover, there's a chapter about becoming a parent, and I talk about how I tried to navigate that space. So it really is just meant to inspire people along the journey, whether they're working in a corporate field or whether they're looking to start a business. And I really just cover the topics of like, hey, here are the things you need to know, and here's some tips for how to overcome certain things that come your way.
That's really awesome. And you talk about the food industry, which I think there's so many amazing
Yes.
lessons to learn from having to be in a
Yes.
service. I'm curious if like one of the top two or three things that have come about that have really, I guess you could say, give you an upper hand when it comes to your
Mm.
parenting.
Again, I think it's been my common theme this entire this entire conversation. But when I worked in the restaurant, I had to communicate with customers, I had to communicate with employees, and they are coming from all over, right? All different backgrounds, all different childhoods, different adult experiences. And I was being sort of thrust into this and having to learn how to communicate with each of them differently. They saw me as, and I've been accused of being a cheerleader at a funeral. I'm a little bubbly as a general personality front. So I had to learn how to communicate with them in a way that they received it. So it wasn't just this annoying cheerleader bopping through the restaurant, but rather, again, learning how to connect with them on a level so we could work together. And to your point about the service space, if everyone could work in the service industry, even if it's for 6 months, I think as humans, and it would drastically improve how we speak and communicate with each other every day.
100%, 100%. And to your point, just the only thing that I would add to everything that you said, having also worked in the service industry at one point, I mean, I am a psychotherapist. I'm still in the service industry in many
Yes.
ways. Is also not only are the people coming from diverse backgrounds, but they're coming from a diverse an hour before they walk into your office and into the
Wow.
restaurant, and we don't know where they're coming from, whether it's a horrible doctor's appointment, a funeral, or a birthday
Yes.
party, and and that goes into how we're gonna want to interact with people. And I think to your point as well, when it comes to communication, it has two parts to it. It's what we say, what the other person hears. And what makes parenting, I think, even more difficult on top of it, and I think it's sort of giving every parent a pat on the back, is to realize is a child is in many ways a different species because they hear and they understand, they comprehend
Wow.
differently. And not only do we have to communicate what we need to say to them, but we have to then translate it in our brains and make sure it comes out of our mouths in a way where that 9-year-old understands, which can be really, really hard because we're trying to say, I need a few minutes. And in our head, we might have a few curse words. We might have a very, very loud voice. But right now, that's not the voice that needs to come out. We have to figure out how to filter that out. We have to be able to be mindful enough to know that the words that are coming out now are what that 9-year-old needs to hear because they need help with their project. But mommy needs 10 minutes and I'll help you with the project. I'll do whatever it is we need to do. But right now I need 10 minutes. And that's important because it's putting you in a place where you're able to communicate what you want to say, but what they need to hear.
I love that you said this because I will tell you, every one of my employees would say they're sick and tired of hearing me say this, but I always say to them, when we're dealing with clients or even colleagues, meet them where they are. Meaning not like come down or go up a level or anything like that, but meet them where they are. If you can sense that, and we've worked with some clients that maybe are going through a difficult period or they're struggling with something. It's okay to be like, hey, how are things going? Are you doing all right? It's okay to not necessarily just talk and get it out, but to what you just said, that skill to be able to filter and redirect is so powerful. And I've seen it when it's executed well, that it can literally stabilize volatile environments. It can stabilize conversations that maybe are going off kilter. And likewise with kids, right? You hit the nail on the head. I don't know that many parents understand how valuable that is if you can put it in the right frame for children to understand. So I love that. I mean, it's so important.
And also back to what you were saying before, Julie, is that sometimes there's going to be a situation where we're not going to be able to communicate properly, and we might have said 10 minutes, but those are the only words that came out from the way the filter was working that exact second, and they hear. I don't give a flying hoot about your 10 minutes. I need blueberries. And then our job is, okay, we still have to stay present, stay here and be like, sweetie, I heard what you said. But right now, before we take care of A, B, and C, mommy needs 10 minutes. And it still might not go through because all they're hearing is blueberries. And they might not say that 2-3 times. And I think something that happens to us and any type of parenting sort of situation all the time. And we have to be mindful to realize that yes, I might need 10 minutes and they might need their blueberries and we're going to
Right. Exactly.
clash. And I think a lot of times when it comes to parenting, the way I like talking about, at least in my office, is we have what I like to call white flag moments where we just, all right, F it.
Yes.
Like, let me put up the flag here because I know any sort of things, but it's not going to get done because I know if I went to the bathroom right now, they're gonna knock that door down. So I have to make sure that something is happening here. So what would be an example of like a white flag moment that you've had where like, all right, let me just give in here and then I'll go back to doing what I need to do afterwards?
This happened recently. I mean, we went away for a weekend, and the girls love it when I get in the swimming pool with them. And I have to tell you, I love to swim. But look, my swimming pool days for 4 hours a day are behind me, right? So on that particular day, it's hot. It was 90 degrees. I said, I'll go with you to the pool. I'll hang right next to the pool. I'm not wanting to get in. And they kept at it. My daughter, who never says a word, flipped out, was like, that was the whole reason we came here. I mean, it just escalated into this manipulation, right? And I was proud of her because she's trying to manipulate me. She did a good job. But she was communicating.
And she's not even a teenager yet. Just wait,
I mean,
Julie.
and I have to say, what got me was I was like, man, she had such a great point. She really executed her argument well. And I finally said, all right, fine. I'm going to get in the pool. I said, I'm going to change and I'll meet you down there. And I ended up getting in. And you know what? I ended up having a really great time. We had a blast. But I do think it was in that moment I realized that this was that important to her. This was something she had looked forward to, what she really wanted. And so I raised the flag and said, you know what? Let's give it to her. Like, I might not want to do it, but you know what? This is going to make her happy. So I was able to kind of, like reset my brain and get in. And like I said, it ended up being fantastic. I just wasn't in the that day.
Right. Right. I love that. And I think that's one of the keys to parenting. The way I like phrasing it is we want to be more like palm trees and not like pine trees so that we can be flexible. And it's
Yeah.
so important to be flexible. And I may have my morals of I'm going to sit on the beach here and I'm going to watch them. And that's what I'm doing today because I have no interest of going in and to allow or to give ourselves permission to be able to be influenced by our kids is okay. I think that's a
Yes.
part of parenting because it allows us to stay a palm tree. Because what happens when we're a pine tree, and too strong of a wind comes, we snap,
Yep.
and it's
Exactly.
hard to repair from that snap. And we don't want to snap. And I think that's why you have palm trees growing in areas where there are heavy hurricanes and tornadoes because they have to be
That's
flexible. And it's really
It's
important
totally
for us to go ahead and be that. And I'm so glad you brought that up. And I think it's a really, really good example. What would you say, like looking back at it now that you've written this book and you're tying in a lot of your experiences and also who you are as an entrepreneur and also as a parent? When you look
Sure.
back and say, you know what, I didn't realize this till I started writing this down. This is a valuable lesson for me. Well, what would something be that you'd be like, you know what, that is a really good point. This is something that I'm glad I have that perspective now that I'm at the other end of this book.
It's interesting. When I started the book, it was to tell a story about what I'd learned. And as I wrote the book, I realized that it became almost cathartic, right? To revisit the past and revisit all of the things that I'd overcome that I'd forgotten about, right? And I do think for me, it became a reminder of all of the things, whether they were triumphs or whether they were challenges. And certainly as it relates to my children, I think one of the stories that I treasure the most and that I do talk about in the book is that my husband and I, it took us 5 or 6 years to have the girls. We went through a lot of in vitro fertilization. We had a lot of loss in that span of time, and it was very dark. It was very dark, and it was very hard. And I have to tell you that to be on the other side and to look back and kind of revisit that moment, I look at them and I do have a different perspective on parenthood. Because we were very close to not being able to have our own children, and we weren't going to be able to start the family we thought we were. I do view parenting very differently. I don't look for moments to get away from them. I am thankful for them every day because I almost didn't have it. And so to some degree, I think it reminds us that even in the adversity, even in those dark moments, that's actually going to be a way to inspire you forward. And so I do share that story. Not many people do, but I do because it has shaped the way I parent as well, right? And I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, you don't take advantage of it, and thank you for sharing that. I'm sure it's not an easy thing, at least in the beginning, for you to start talking about. I think, and as you've talked about it, it probably becomes a little easier to talk about. Is there a certain point where you can see talking to your kids about your experience?
We actually have talked to them about it. Because they've asked questions and we've explained. They don't understand the science per se behind a lot of it. But we explained to them because at one point my husband and I were starting the process for adoption. We were working with an agency because we had committed ourselves to having a child one way or the other. And fortunately, as a result, we were able to have our own too. But we do talk to them about it. And I do explain to them that it was very challenging. It was very hard. And we talked to them about, why it's so important to us, right? To give them the time that we have. And we're older as parents, right? I had children at 37. My husband's 10 years older than I am. So we're definitely kind of in the older parent, but I will say that, we share that with them so that they understand what we went through and that we do really appreciate being their parents. And I don't think because we get busy sometimes, maybe those aren't messages that get communicated to the kids, right? Because it's hard and parenting is difficult and raising kids is even more difficult. But
And fun. I want to make it clear for everyone. It's also fun. Okay. It's not just difficult. It's also fun.
No, it is fun. Yes, no, it is fun too. But and I think they appreciate that we share that story. And again, they don't understand the science behind it. That will come probably later in life. But we do try to make them understand why they are special and why sometimes mommy and daddy get really emotional about birthdays or certain things with them. And it's because, we almost didn't have them. So very grateful for that.
And I think that's such a beautiful point. And I think the fact that you can have a relationship where they can ask the questions to mommy and daddy, I think is one of the healthiest things when it comes to being a parent. Is a child should always look at it, and I talk about this a lot on this podcast, I talk about this a lot in my office as well. We want to be able to have a relationship with our kids where they're constantly like, oh, I can't wait to talk to my parents, instead of the, oh, I don't want my parents to find out. And that relationship in that way should be that way into adulthood. And I think it's something that, them having those questions and be able to feel comfortable to talk to mommy and daddy, there should never, ever be a question that a child should be apprehensive or thinking twice about when it comes to asking mommy and daddy. So, and I think having that relationship is so important. And the fact that you can share that, it goes to my next question, which you sort of already answered, but maybe you could add more to it of being that, there was a time period where you and your husband were yearning to be parents, weren't able to be parents. And then having other people around you become parents and maybe growing up in places where people were having children a lot younger. I'm curious, looking back at it now, what can you say has been something that yes, every situation happens the way it is, but how are things different from your point of view, starting a family at the older end of things, so to speak, as opposed to if you would have had kids 10, 15 years before that?
That's a great question. And one I love to answer too. I think for a lot of people, when they start a family, there's pressure, whether it's pressure of age or they're pressure because they feel like they should have children. We started thinking about having a family when we were ready. We talked about it amongst ourselves. My husband would have loved to have had children long before we decided to, but I had told him, hey, look, I'm not ready yet. And then, when I was ready, right, I wanted to start my business first, and he respected that. And then, I was ready. Now, this is the one thing I will warn people on, is that I didn't anticipate that we would have the struggles that we did have. And so to some degree, I look back and say, gosh, if we would have just started maybe 2 years sooner, would it have mattered? But to that point, I will say I was ready. So when those children came, we were financially secure. We were secure in our jobs, in our businesses. We were happy. We were fulfilled as people. And so that when those children came in, it was just adding to what we had built in our life. So I would say to anyone, don't race into it because you think you have to, or because you think you have to do it by
pressure from others or
Yeah.
society?
And to me, I felt more emotionally ready too, right? I had matured as a person. I was ready to be, as you know, as a parent, you do have to be selfless. You can't be selfish. And you do have to put others' needs ahead of your own, not just on Mondays, but every single day. And so when that responsibility came, I feel like I was better equipped. Now, it was still very, very messy. I'm not going to lie. It was very challenging, but but I was more emotionally ready for it. And like I said, I think it shaped my perspective being a little bit older, right? I had the career, I had the house, I had the friends, I had the life. And this was the cherry on top of the cake, right?
That's very good, and I think that goes to the point we were saying earlier, is that there's an emotional healthiness that says cocktail party can wait, because watching a show with them or going to a movie that is so much more important. It's not even a question regarding how to go about things, and I think there's you talk about being healthy and set in so many ways. I think socially realizing the priorities that we have is a very big part of it, and I think that does come with age in a certain way, and which I think is to a benefit to parents that may be starting their journey a little bit later, whether it's something planned or something not planned. And I think I'm so glad that you brought it up. My wife and I being fortunate to be on the other end of that and starting family young. I think there are certain things that we could look back and say, well, I wish I could have been more mature in this, or could have been more settled in this. And the situation is what it is, and it's about dealing with it the best way that you can. And I think that's something that I for sure picked up today. That has, I think, your kids are very fortunate to have in a parent and parents between you and your husband. And so many different areas that we've been able to talk about today. I want to be mindful of the time over here, and obviously the thing that sticks to me more than anything is gratitude and
Yes.
communication. And I'm curious if there's something maybe we didn't talk about that maybe you want to spend a minute just to be able to say, hey, this is something that I think is important as we talk about the balance between family, parenting, and being an entrepreneur.
The one thing I would say in this kind of encapsulates all of it. And, it isn't just about the book or being an entrepreneur or being a parent. I think if we could all realize that we're all on a similar journey, right? We might live in different places. We might have kids that are different ages. We might be at different stages in our career, but we're all going to encounter similar experiences and similar challenges. And if we can share those with others, if we can share our stories and connect with people, I really do feel like that's going to give other people inspiration. I know even for myself, I've listened and learned to the people that have been in my life. Even as we've gone through some dark times, I've leaned on people that have been in the same place that I was. And without those connections and without sharing those journeys, I don't think I would have been able to move through it as I did. And so I would say
Well
the
said.
one thing I would just say is, look, we're all on a journey. While they might be different, we're all on similar paths. So if we can share it together, I think that's going to make the road a little easier.
That's words of the wise. So thank you very much for saying that. Before we get into some rapid fire questions, before we end off of here, I'm curious where people can find more about you and maybe more about your book.
Yeah, absolutely. They can find me on my website, which is www.juliecroppgareleck.com. There are links to the book, links to social platforms, links to the businesses that I do have. But that's the best place to go to get more information.
Awesome, and we will post that in the show notes over here. So as we finish up over here, Julie, I'm curious. You were talking before about being able to be listened to, and I'm curious. Maybe there's either a podcast or YouTube video that you like watching, someone you like listening to, maybe a book that you've turned through in the past that could be beneficial, whether it's to the entrepreneurship of that you have, whether it's to the balance or that grace or communication that you've talked about, something that you found moving and helpful to yourself.
Yeah, I will say, podcasts are definitely a great outlet. Certainly love the content that you have as well. I think parenting is such a hard thing, and we don't always ask for help. So it's great to have podcasts to refer to. I would say from a book standpoint, I'm a voracious reader. I read everything. And so any new business book that comes out, or if there's a book on how to talk to your kids or how to communicate with teenagers, I've read it. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is one of my favorites by Stephen Covey. I still sometimes go back to that because it just makes me feel a little bit more balanced. But I would say there are so many great podcasts and like I said, just finding, I don't have just one. I probably listen to a smattering of them from time to time, depending on how I feel. But I have to tell you, that's the beauty of what even you're putting out too is that when you need a little bit of inspiration or advice in a certain area, you can leverage podcast and content to get that. So
Yeah, I agree 100%.
yeah.
And, I'm so glad you brought up the book. I actually think that this is we've had over 50 recordings that we're putting out at this point already. And I think you're the first person to bring up that book. And I got to
Really?
say, if I had a list of like top 10 books
Yeah.
that of like all time favorites that I could take with me, anywhere, that would probably have to be on it. So thank you for bringing that up. This was not talked about beforehand for anyone listening over here. So
Yeah.
I think it was really cool that, I think it's something, and they have it for kids as well now. And I think it's something that it could be so helpful in so many ways. So that's such a good example. My next question for you is, and I'm curious, if you can think of a babysitter from history, cannot be a family member, that you'd be comfortable to watch your daughters, who would that be?
Oh, from my childhood?
Well, not necessarily from your childhood, but in general, like someone from history or someone from the past that you would be comfortable to be the babysitter of your kids.
Oh, that is such a great question, and that's difficult. Because I can't say my parents, right?
Right.
Can't say my
Cannot be a family member.
can't be a family member. Oh goodness. All the people I'm thinking of are family members. Do people have a rapid fire for this? This is very challenging. It's hard to say.
People have gone to Mr. Rogers or
he would. That's a good one, Mr. Rogers. My kids watch Mr. Rogers episodes, and I mean, who didn't love that? I loved his gentle demeanor.
Right.
So that's actually a good one. I might take that one.
Okay, I'll give you a pass on that one, and it's a pretty common one. And I think you can't go wrong with that. So that's a really good answer. But I guess my last question for you right now is, if you could think of a everyday mundane superpower that you would like to have as a mom to help out with everyday things as a parent, what would that be?
Superpower would be to read people's minds, possibly. I think.
Yeah, you think you want to read your girls' minds?
From time to time, in those situations where I'm not sure exactly what's going on, I would probably save a lot of time if I could. That might be a good superpower. It might also help me adjust my tone and my approach to a lot of situations. So I think that would be my superpower.
Okay. All right, accepted. That's a really good answer. Well, this has been an absolute pleasure, Julie. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's been a great conversation.